racing to the Breeders' Cup, and this is a deep dive look at the early nominations for the Breeders' Cup Classic. These are not selections. Really, this is just kind of the art and science of handicapping, taking an early look at the 11 entries nominated for the Breeders' Cup Classic. We'll have full previews of all 14 Breeders' Cup races next week. But for those of you who like to handicap, maybe watch a few replays, kind of get an early look at what you some of the projected odds, this is the show for you. Otherwise, you can wait for the selections next week. But I want to take a look at each and every one of these horses individually, take a look at some of the key factors that we have to consider for the Breeders' Cup, and then how those factors may play out next week after we get post positions and learn a little bit more about the track. Then we'll have final decisions. Remember, hit subscribe, ring that bell for notifications. We will have previews of all 14 races coming up next week as we race you to the Breeders' Cup. Let's take a look at Code of Honor. Code of Honor is trained by Shug McGahee, who is 0 for 8 in the Breeders' Cup Classic, and he has a couple of second place finishes, including Easy Goer and Seeking the Gold. Now, Code of Honor is a 2-time winner at 10 furlongs, and he is also riding a 3-race win streak, which started in the 1-mile Dwyer Stakes in July. He was third in the Kentucky Derby, moved up to second after the disqualification. This horse really has come a long way, and really the only two questions that you've got to ask of Code of Honor in this race is, can he ship out to Santa Anita, and what is he going to do facing older horses? But Code of Honor looking like 4-1, maybe 9-2 on my early line as we take a look at the Breeders' Cup Classic contenders. Bill Mott sends out 2 runners in the Breeders' Cup Classic. The first one is Elate, and Elate is going to take some money. I peg her for 8-1 as my first odds line look. Now, Elate is 3 for 3 at the 10 furlong distance. This will be the final race of Elate's career, and she's going to take on the boys. The key questions for Elate: she's only 2 for 6 this year, and she comes off kind of a demanding race at 9 furlongs at Keeneland, and she just kind of struggled the entire race at Keeneland. Now, that was her first race since kind of a hard-knocking effort in the personal ensign, and she may have bounced a little bit. But is she going to come back here at 10 furlongs facing a higher class of horses and facing pace pressure all the way from the get-go? You know, if you look at Elate's running style, her best races have been on the lead and near the lead. She can come from a couple of lengths back, but she is not a closer. And with the pace in this race, she may get shuffled back a little bit more than she is used to, and she has to go 10 furlongs against some of the top horses in the male division. Those are the key questions for Elate. The price right now looks like it's going to be about 8-1 on the board. John Sadler picked up a Breeders' Cup Classic win last year with Accelerate and tries to make it back-to-back wins with Higher Power. Now, Higher Power's best race was in the Pacific Classic, but if you take a deeper look, you know, it's hard to really take a look at that Beyer speed figure. He picked up a 107 speed figure, which is roughly 6 to 7 points higher than anything else he has earned in his career. The key factor was he did beat some good horses in that race in the Pacific Classic, and he kind of opened up the race going into the turn. He really ran a strong effort, and he may have just bounced in the Awesome Again off that big race. My questions for him, as he's never had a race like that before, and who's to say he can come back to that big of an effort? He is an older horse, so he maybe has his form already pegged out, and we'll see. I don't know. His recent workouts are okay. I'm not saying they're outstanding, but he does seem to be coming into the race in good order. He did stumble out of the gate in the Awesome Again, so maybe that cost him a length, but really watching the replay, he broke a little slow, but then he kind of quickly recovered and kind of secured his position. Now, he was trapped a little bit on the backside, so that may have cost him a length at one point when he was shuffled back when Mongolian Groom was kind of allowed to be on the lead, and Mackenzie kind of moved up on the outside of him. So there is a little bit of a trip note for Higher Power in the Awesome Again stakes if you want to take a look at that. Meanwhile, you should expect about 15-1 on the tote board for Higher Power. Math Wizard comes into the Breeders' Cup Classic off a win in the Pennsylvania Derby. He was over 25-1 that day, and he should be about 30-1 on the board in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Math Wizard did benefit from an outside closer bias on Pennsylvania Derby Day A lot of horses that closed late and ran out in the middle of the track with wide weight late moves, those were the horses that did well. The speed horses that made mid-race moves like Landeskog and Guarana and even War of Will and a couple of the other horses, the favorite in that race, Mr. Money, they kind of all faltered late. So Math Wizard was able to pick up the pieces. He's got some new owners for this race, has to go 10 furlongs for the first time in his career, and he is stepping up in class. Those are some of the challenges facing Math Wizard. On the positive side, you're going to get a fair price, probably 30-1 on the son of algorithms. Mackenzie is your most likely Breeders' Cup Classic favorite, and Bob Baffert is 3 for 22 with Classic starters, including victories by Triple Crown winner American Pharoah, and then he came back with Arrogate, and then he also picked up a controversial win with Bairn, also in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Meanwhile, Mackenzie 2 for 6 on the year and coming off a loss in the Awesome Again. That was kind of a tricky race that day where Mike Smith allowed Mongolian Groom to kind of sneak away going into the turn, and Mackenzie just could not run him down. But also Mongolian Groom kind of pulled away with a fast final 3 furlongs in that race. So Mackenzie may benefit from the outing. He's never won at 10 furlongs. That's a big question. And can he pick up and regroup after that tough loss in the Awesome Again? His best race on the year was definitely the Whitney Stakes. He kind of just laid even with the horses coming into the turn. 4 or 5 horses came up on his flank, and then he pulled away on a demanding surface at Saratoga that day. That was a strong effort, and his Beyer speed figure in the Whitney was a 111, and that's higher than anybody else in this race. So Mackenzie, 7-2, the most likely favorite for the Breeders' Cup Classic. Mongolian Groom, the upset winner of the Awesome Again, and Enabish Ganbat picks up his first Classic starter. They are Breeders' Cup nominated, but they're going to have to pay a $200,000 fee to do that. And even though they won a win and you're in race, those are the rules. And Mongolian Groom, he's kind of been knocking heads with the big dogs all summer. He did run in the Pacific Classic, the San Diego Handicap, when he ran second to Catalina Cruiser. That was a pretty nice effort. And then he was shuffled back in the Woodward when the kind of a group of horses kind of collapsed in mid-stretch. He was ready to kind of make a small move, but he did kind of get trapped off in that race. So Mongolian Groom does have some hidden form, and he did show a new dimension going to the lead and drawing off down the stretch in the 1 1/8 Awesome Again. Key questions for the Classic is, can he go 10 furlongs? He's never won at that distance. He's facing horses like Seeking the Soul and Mackenzie again, but he's also got to face new shooters like Elate and Code of Honor and Vino Rosso and horses like that. Although he did run against Vino Rosso in the Hollywood Gold Cup this summer. So Mongolian Groom, my line has him at early odds, about 15-1 for the Breeders' Cup Classic. If you're looking for a long shot, Owendale may fit the bill. 17-1 is my early odds, and Brad Cox has his first Breeders' Cup Classic starter. This son of Into Mischief had a rough trip in the Travers Stakes. That was his only attempt at 10 furlongs. Ordinarily, as a rule, Into Mischiefs win early. They win early in their 3-year-old years, and then they kind of regress later off. But this guy has kind of proven, as you get more crops of racing age and some higher class of mares, Owendale may be able to turn the tides on that Into Mischief trend. He came back with a nice win in the Oklahoma Derby. I like the fact that he was able to lay close to the pace. He was never more than 4 lengths off it, made a 3-wide move entering the stretch, and then really drew off from that field. Ran a competitive 3rd-place finish in the Preakness Stakes with a wide trip when the track was playing well to inside speed that day. So the questions for Owendale: can he get 10 furlongs being a son of Into Mischief? Has his form held form after the Oklahoma Derby? That was a big effort. Picked up a 97 speed figure, and overall the speed figures are hovering in that lower 100 mark. He's going to have to run a career high speed figure to win the Breeders' Cup Classic. Seeking the Soul is another contender, and this year Dallas Stewart 0 for 1 in Breeders' Cup Classic. He entered the venerable dollar bill back in 2002, so just his 2nd Breeders' Cup Classic starter. Seeking the Soul last year ran in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. He also ran in the Pegasus Stakes, so he's got some Grade 1 experience. But his recent form after winning the Stephen Foster Win and You're In back at Churchill Downs underneath the Twin Spires, he lost by 18 lengths in the Pacific Classic, and that was as the 2-1 favorite. Then came back at 11-1 and lost in the Awesome Again. Again, another one who made a mid-race move, kind of as the speed held that day, his best chances to win for Seeking the Gold is to get a strong pace and to get kind of a meltdown where some of those closers can kind of come into that speed coming into the turn. And he does get a full field, and I do think we're going to have some mid-pack runners. So Seeking the Soul is kind of interesting. He does seem to be working well, and Dallas Stewart on these big days. He's had tremendous success in the Triple Crown races, again, finishing in the money at the Pegasus Stakes at long odds and running big last year in the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile. Seeking the Soul is definitely one you want to take a look at. At Churchill Downs in the Win and You're In was a weaker field, and I'm just not sure he is ready to face solid Grade 1 horses, but I do think he's the type of horse you may want to use in the exactas and the trifectas. That's Seeking the Soul in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Vino Rosso is a son of Curlin, and this guy enters in sharp form, and Todd Pletcher, lifetime, has an 0-13 record in the Breeders' Cup Classic. 11 of his 13 Breeders' Cup Classic runners have finished out of the money. So what's going to be different about Vino Rosso? Well, he does not have a long, sustained campaign like many of Todd Pletcher's runners have had over the years. He's lightly raced this year with just 5 starts, and one of those was at 7 furlongs, the Carter Stakes. He does have a win out west. He did ship and win in the Hollywood Gold Cup. Then he did run third to Mackenzie in the Whitney Stakes, bounded back nicely against Code of Honor, was disqualified off the victory, but Vino Rosso has 10 furlong experience. He's run against graded horses, did run against Justify last year in the Belmont Stakes, and he does seem to be lightly raced this year and ready to peak. He's had a couple of great workouts in recent weeks, and the 10 furlong distance should be no problem. Vino Rosso, my early morning line is about 5-1, maybe 6-1 odds, and Vino Rosso is definitely a contender you want to take a look at here at this 10 furlong distance. War of Will is another contender, and he is a Grade 1 winner in the Preakness Stakes. Overall, his lifetime winner is 4 for 13. He's coming off some hidden trips. This is a horse that he ran against the bias at Belmont when it was closers and there was an inside bias, and he was wide that day and was purposely ridden wide. Then he came back in the Jim Dandy when it favored closers. He went to the lead, kind of stopped for no reason on the turn. Now, he has been working out with blinkers, and he does seem to be taking over the Santa Anita surface. He's already got one workout at 5 furlongs there, and his last workout at Belmont was also a nice workout for War of Will. You know, he does have a little bit of a turf stride, and I've always questioned his ability to get the distance, but he does seem to be handling this long campaign, and he does seem fresh in his recent workouts, and he is coming off some back-to-back kind of hidden trips. This is the type of horse that I usually like to bet, and I will definitely be taking a look at War of Will in some of the exotic combinations, and maybe even as kind of a long shot 25-31 horse in the daily doubles and pick threes. You know, he's got some sneaky races that can make him competitive here. And the interesting thing, if he does wear blinkers, he does seem to run more focused when he's on the lead, but he's not a front runner. He's the type of horse that needs to make one run to the lead and then try to open up. And if he can do that at the right time, if McKinzie waits too long or Mongolian Groom is coming back to the field, I'm still not totally sure who is going to be the pace setter in the Breeders' Cup Classic. We'll have more about that in our final preview show. And remember, all 14 races will be previewed next week, so hit subscribe to be reminded of those videos. Now, getting back to War of Will, this 3-year-old son of Warfront, you know, he had a nice effort in the Kentucky Derby, was kind of blocked off, and then the big win and the Risen Star when he won by 2 lengths followed up after that Lecomte victory. So War of Will, definitely a contender. He has to improve speed figure wise. He's never broken the 100-point barrier on the Beyer speed figure. So if he were to win the Classic, it would be a career best effort. Yoshida is the final contender for the Breeders' Cup Classic, and Yoshida enters 0 for 5 on the year, but he did run 4th in the Breeders' Cup Classic in 2018, losing to Accelerate. He does have the class. He's won some Grade 1 races. He's also got some turf form, and he seems to be lightly raced coming into this. He ran back-to-back strong races in the Whitney and the Woodward, and then passed on the Jockey Club Gold Cup. I think Elate's going to be in this race, who's also trained by Bill Mott to kind of force the pace, kind of set up those fractions, because Yoshida does his best running coming from behind. And last year in a 14-horse Woodward, he did pick up a Grade 1 victory at Saratoga. Yoshida ran also, I thought, a strong race in the Whitney. He was gaining on Mackenzie late, and he laid back at the tail end of the pack, let horses like Vino Rosso make mid-race moves, and then picked up the pace late and finished second in that Grade 1 Whitney to McKinzie. He does have a couple of speed figures this year over 100. He's got a 105 and a 108. And then last year, he also had a 103 in the Breeders' Cup Classic. So he's already faster than 4 or 5 of the contenders. And the older horses overall have a speed edge on the 3-year-olds. Horses like Owendale and War of Will and Code of Honor are going to have to improve by 2-3 speed points to match up with some of these older horses like Mackenzie, like Yoshida, and like Vino Rosso. So if you like Yoshida, you're going to want him to come running late, and you're going to hope for a nice pace collapse or a strong pace. And Elate and Mongolian Groom could be the key to setting up that stretch run by Yoshida in the Breeders' Cup Classic. That's a look at your 11 contenders for the Breeders' Cup Classic. Hopefully this gets you up to speed. Take a look at some of those race replays and find out who you like. We'll have our selections after we know the post positions next week, but the Breeders' Cup Classic, always a great finale to the Breeders' Cup weekend. And lots of ways you can go. You can go, I think you're going to get a fair price on Mackenzie at 7-2. You can also lean towards Code of Honor and Vino Rosso, or maybe you like one of the long shots like Higher Power, Mongolian Groom, or even maybe a couple of 3-year-olds at Owendale and War of Will if they can pick up career high speed figures. Remember, hit subscribe, ring that bell for notifications. We're racing you up to the Breeders' Cup.